My name is Aria Evans. I am the artistic director intern through the Metcalf Foundation here at Soulpepper Theatre. And I'm also the programmer for the Community Conversations. We are gathering in Dagarando, which is known as the gathering place on Dish with One Spoon territory. Community Conversations, which you're all here for, would not be possible without the generous support of TD and the TD Ready commitment. They have been supporting Soulpepper for years with our intent to radical inclusion and making events like this possible. Community Conversations will be continuing all season long in tandem to each of our shows. And the next community conversation, which is happening on June 11th, is called The Power of Water, and it relates to Where the Blood Mixes, which is written by Kevin Loring and directed by Danny Lazan. So continue to come check out these community conversations that are going to happen all season long. We'd love to see you and be in dialogue with you. I'm so happy that you've joined us. This community conversation is called Pipe Up, and it follows Pipeline. And it is my incredible pleasure to welcome our artistic director, Winnie Mangesha, up to the stage. She also directed Pipeline and is going to be the host for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you guys again for being a part of it. Some of you have just seen the play, and some of you are joining us from other performances, and it's great to be able to get together and have a deeper dive and conversation about this. So today's conversation is Pipeline, and I mentioned at the end of the show to those who are watching the show that it's not actually directly explained explicitly in the play, but it does refer to the school-to-prison pipeline that is looking at the disciplinary practices and policies that sometimes often move to criminalization of young people at disproportionate rates in the Black community. And we're going to have a deeper dive to talk about that with an incredible group of leaders in the community who are bringing awareness to this issue in Canada. And it's my great pleasure to invite them to the stage. First, we have Jody Yadun. Prior to recently managing a province-wide research and advocacy project at Black Legal Action Centre focused on the school-to-prison pipeline, Jody Yadun was the Restorative Justice Program Manager at 311 Jarvis Youth Court with Peace Builders Canada, overseeing diversion and life skills programming for justice-involved youth. Jody also managed a reintegration centre and TDSB alternative school that utilized an African-centered curriculum and engagement strategy for youth exiting incarceration. Currently, Judy provides consultant services to organizations with a commitment to strengthening services for vulnerable populations facing difficulties navigating systems such as the education, justice, and child welfare system. Her motivation to address these disparities is due to the visible inequities Black and Indigenous youth continue to face. Jody believes policy reform, culturally responsive engagement, and collaboration is key in dismantling anti-Black racism. Welcome, Jody. Next, we have Janelle Scarrett. Janelle Scarrett is the Chief Executive Officer at York Region's Children's Aid Society. She's an executive with over 30 years of leadership experience in the nonprofit sector. She's a published author, public speaker, moderator, and facilitator with a broad range of experiences in children's rights, anti-racism, diversity and inclusion, advocacy training, organizational development, communications, and economic inclusion. Janelle was also the first head of the PTA for the Afrocentric Alternative School. Also, her son attended that school. Welcome, Janelle. Next up, we have Anthony N. Morgan, who is the manager of the City of Toronto's Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. He's also involved in human rights education, legal research and analysis. And Anthony is a frequent legal, social, and public affairs thought leader and commentator on issues concerning race and racism, critical multiculturalism, and critical race theory here in Canada. His writing and commentary on these issues have been featured in multiple major newspapers and broadcast outlets across Canada. Welcome, Anthony. And you know how it is, we've just moved through a new Zoom world, and so we have Habiba Diallo with us, and we really wanted to include her, but she is in Halifax. But with the powers of technology, we now have Habiba with us. So we will welcome Habiba. Hello, Habiba. Apparently on an island, somewhere where we would like to be. Welcome, Habiba. Habiba was a finalist in the 2020 Bristol Short Story Prize and is also an activist in support of women's maternal health. She recently founded MunilShop.com, where you can check out her latest home decor creations. And most relevant to today's conversation, she's the author of #BlackInSchool, a book published in 2021, available across the country, based on her journals that she wrote in high school, which documented her experiences in Canada's education system. Welcome, Habiba.
Thank you.
So we also would love to hear from you. As you know, this is going to be a companion piece with anybody who comes to the show. They will receive this, it will be emailed to them. So we would also love to hear any questions from you. We'll have a discussion and then we'll open up to the floor. And also we should say hello to our virtual audience who will be watching this as well. So I'll start off with a question for all of you. You know, when I first read Pipeline, I was very moved. It was years ago, and I was really excited about a conversation like this in Canada, because I think we often consider this an issue that's only American. And I personally grew up in Scarborough, and a lot of the things that I saw in the play resonated. And all of you have worked very hard to bring awareness to the fact that this is actually a current issue and a local issue as well. So I wanted to start by asking you sort of what led you to the work that you're doing, and maybe I'll start with Janelle, with you, with your involvement with the African Alternative School, and why you thought that was an important step to make, that we needed that school, and your involvement with it.
Thank you so much. And well, as a mom, and you're looking at your boy, so I really identified with that theme in the play. You're looking at your boy, they're very cute until they start getting taller than other people and they resemble the suspect and all of those kinds of things. And so, having worked in community services for many years and I've seen that pattern repeat, I was really looking for an opportunity for my boy to learn in an atmosphere that reaffirmed his identity and reaffirmed that sense of his ability to accomplish anything that he wanted to. Because, you know, growing up in Canada, as I have, I came here in 1969, so I was in kindergarten when I first came. And I saw the impact of that, of being excluded from the curriculum, of having examples that portray you in a negative way. That's my first-hand experience with that. And I thought, well, if we can't do better for our offspring, then, you know, so we stand on the shoulders, of course, of our ancestors. I say that first. And I recognize that I had to do something for my children and for others as well, because prior to going to the Afrocentric school and ensuring or really being part of that, I was tutoring on Saturdays in an African-centered program. And my first job was at Tropicana Community Services, also tutoring students on a Saturday. So this is a lifelong commitment that ended with me really making that decision that I had to put my child in that positive atmosphere. So, yeah.
I just want to acknowledge that, you know, a lot of people don't know this stuff behind the scenes, what's going on to actually create these opportunities for youth. It took many, many years to get the Afrocentric school acknowledged and supported by the TDSB, which it now is. And I just, you know, I just want to acknowledge that there's so many people who work quietly in the background to make these things happen and who support it on the PTA like you have. So for you, your work with the Black Legal Action Center, you've done some incredible research over the past couple of years, really relevant to this topic. I'd love you to share some interesting points that you thought might be relevant for our audience to hear.
For sure. I guess similar to, I call her Auntie Janelle. I've known her for many years. And similar to her, I also am a mother. I have 4 children, 3 of which are boys. And the first thing for me was seeing my children going through some of the same experiences that I had gone through in the school system. And I was thinking, why is it that my children are facing the same level of racism? They're still not being reflected in the curriculum. And I went to the schools, I was in school in the 90s, and here we are in the 2000s, and I'm seeing the same thing. So it was really disheartening, and I was thinking, what can I do as a parent, as somebody that's involved in community, to make sure that the spaces that we're in are reflective of our children, right? The second reason in terms of why I do what I do is working with young people. There always seems to be this challenge where once a young person is introduced to the justice system, it's like a revolving door. They go in, they come out. They try and get their goals straight, and we try and get them the resources that they need, and they're back in again. And they just can't seem to get out once they get in. And what I kept hearing from young people consistently is when I would sit down and talk with them around not just the incident that led them into the justice system, but tell me about your life, tell me about some of the things that you were involved in before. They would always go back to school, and they would talk about just their experiences in grade 2, grade 3, where they were labeled as the problem child, the difficult child, disruptive, not connected with the curriculum, and having that negative label stuck with them. And for so many young people, it started in school, this spiral of just a negative path. And so for me, I said, how can we go back to our foundation? We need to go back to the school system if we're going to look at the justice system, right? And look at how do we really engage our young people, our children in ways that are meaningful, in ways that they connect with, where they can say, I'm in school and I feel welcome. I feel like this is a safe place for me. And I know that because I'm with people that genuinely care for me, and I can tell that by the way that they engage with me.
And so what are some of the findings that you found? Because it's a quite disproportionate rate of suspensions, and so can you tell us a little bit about that?
For sure. So I guess one thing I would say is a lot of times when people think about the school to prison pipeline, they kind of picture this straight line, and it's the young person was in school and they were arrested and now they're in jail. And realistically, that's not what it typically looks like. The majority of young people in our country, they don't spend time incarcerated, but they do spend time wrapped up in the justice system. And so if you imagine that road, imagine a road with all these like little loopholes. So think of Super Mario and he can jump over this hole, but what happens is our young people fall through these cracks along the way. And it could be through major things with suspension or expulsion. It can also be in other ways. So if you have, so the majority of us probably work, we go to our place of employment, or maybe you're working from home, but imagine if you've been in that place where you've had a job that you've hated. And maybe you've hated it because it was toxic. Maybe your coworkers, you didn't have a good relationship with them. And so every day you get up and you're like, oh my God, it's Monday, I gotta go to work, I gotta face these people, I don't feel comfortable here. And that's what many of our young people face. So if they're going into an environment like that, we've already done them a disservice. And if they decide to skip class that day and maybe go hang out with their friends, and that ends up being involved in activities that are not so favorable, that's also an example of the school to prison pipeline. Because ultimately, when our young people are not engaged, they will find other ways to be engaged, for better or for worse, right? In terms of some of the stats, we know that even looking at suspension, I think it's at almost 30%. So if you look at a black student versus their white counterpart, they are 30 times more likely to be suspended for the same incident. And working at 311 Jarvis, I think for me, that was where it became starkly apparent to me, where it was in my face. We would have young people come in, arrested for the same incident. Maybe we have 5 young people, they're all arrested for, I'm just gonna say stealing a car. 3 of them get offered informal diversion, which means that they can go and do counseling with an organization, or maybe they'll find a way to give back to community. The 2 black young people that were also involved are now facing formal charges, and they're going through probation for the same charge. And that happened time and time again, where I would have to say, like, this is obvious, like, is nobody else seeing this?
Anthony, what from your purview? So you're at the city, the Anti-Black Racism Unit. What are some of the things that you are seeing and the realities of the school to prison pipeline?
Yeah, well, thank you for the question, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to share and participate in this really important conversation. And as you mentioned, often we like to think of ourselves as being exempt as Canadian collective society from these challenges of anti-Black racism within our systems. But within education, we know that it's prevalent, as has been spoken to effectively as it relates to dropout or push-out rates, suspensions and expulsions. There's also the issue of streaming Black young people into less academically rigorous opportunities, not because of them actually showing interest or an inclination in that field, but often when we look at the data, it's related to presumptions about their intellectual capacity, and in a negative way, thinking that they're not capable of participating in classes that would allow them to go on to university. And so in the work that I'm doing, I see a lot of that. I see a lot of parents coming forward who are tired and frustrated, just like, of course, the mom in this story, and just really trying to hold it together and struggling to find resources, struggling to find an ear, struggling to find a modicum of compassion from the school systems, from the teachers, from the superintendent. They're often very desperate or they feel a sense of desperation. They're not desperate, they feel a deep sense of desperation, and they're often at a breaking point and wanting somebody to just hear and validate not just them and their story, but see what's going on with their child and change course and not criminalize a Black young person, even if they were involved in a fight, as Jody has effectively spoken to. And I think is also captured within the play itself. There are instances where fights can happen within school, but the issue is the punishment is disproportionate often when we look at how Black young people are treated, especially young Black men. And so it's something that continues to be a challenge, and it is fueling and funneling a lot of young people into the criminal justice system.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances to talk about, right? And play raises them. Definitely the young man in this play pushes a teacher, and that is sort of measurable, and it's harder to measure what he has talked about his teacher doing to him, isn't it? And it's what you talked about as far as the everyday, the environment, and sort of his humanity and his experiences, or his desire to tell him that I don't want to be touched, I don't want to be spoken to, and that's really complicated. The other fork in the road that I see really, I think this play it really illustrates is how do you choose the best opportunity for your child? If you send them to this private school where they become sort of the one or the two Black faces in the school, versus sending them to a school where there's more diversity, but there are inequities in the way that school is resourced, you end up sort of in a conundrum. So I don't know what else to say other than maybe you have something to say about that.
May I speak to that? At the end of the play, the instructions, number one, hear from me. I think how you determine is connecting with the young person and say, okay, what are the things that actually fuel you? What makes you tick? Paying attention, of course, not only at the point of deciding on the school to go to, but an ongoing practice of creating space for them to share who they are and to nurture and support that and respond to that. Because for some young people, that will be the place that will be best for their thriving, nourishing, and development. But as we saw for in this particular case, it wasn't what was happening necessarily at school, in part, but there was also so many other layers. And that notion of, I think, belonging and that desire for belonging and being seen in a way that is affirming is something that's universal, but it looks different for young people depending on the space, depending on who they are and what they're interested in.
My children, my family, we originally came from Scarborough. And when we realized that we had outgrown the home that we were in, we decided it was time to buy. And of course, this is going back 5 years, and even then, we couldn't afford to buy in Scarborough. So we looked around and we realized for us to buy, we would have to move to Clarington, which is far East Durham. And to be honest, it was a struggle. I was thinking, okay, so my children are used to being in this very diverse city. Are we going to make this leap and do this? And we had a number of conversations with our children, and we were very frank. We're like, listen, when you start school, you may be the only Black child in your class. We might be the only Black family in the school. Like, we really didn't know what exactly we were going into. And so we really did our best to equip our children before they started. And that's something that some families don't think about, right? And the first week they started school, I remember picking up my sons. We're driving home, and my youngest at the time, he was in grade 3. And we're driving, and how was school? And he goes, Mom, what's Bloods and Crips? I said, what? I said, where did you hear those words? And he said, oh, it was recess, and my friend said, where did you move from? And he said, I moved from Scarborough. And he said, oh, are you Bloods or are you Crips? Right? So I was thinking, oh wow, we need to have a lot more conversations around this. And so I ended up calling the principal, and I said, these are some of the comments that are happening what are you doing in terms of teaching the other children in the school around, you know, cultural responsivity, what it means to have a diverse classroom, different cultures, different ways of being, and all of these things. So part of it has been really working closely with my children around who they are and ensuring that they have a strong foundation and a village around them outside of school. And then the second part has been me being really hyper active as a parent to connect with the school. I provide books and resources and a whole number of tools because I want to make sure that they have what they need so that my children have what they need as well.
We have Habiba with us here, and you know, as we say, the first instruction was to listen to me, right? And Habiba, when she was in high school, she kept a journal throughout. And so Habiba, I wanted to know what drove you to take your journal and get it published, so that more people could hear about your experiences.
Thanks, Wayne. So ultimately what brought me to this work and to the writing of this autobiographical piece, these journal entries, is just my own lived experience, which many have discussed, you know, through their work with youth, those who are on the panel. And so I lived and witnessed firsthand a lot of these, the labeling, the provocation, everything that everyone's spoken about. And I understand just how frustrating it can be in that sense of desperation that Anthony spoke of. And when you feel that you have no recourse and no one's getting you, no one's understanding you. So for me, putting it on paper was giving myself some form of recourse, some form of understanding. And I think when I think about it now, and as I'm talking about it, compassion to myself, you know, that sometimes is so lacking when you're there in school. And then as I look back on all of this, and as I look back on all my writing, I think really what prompted me to make it public and share it with the world was the realization that there are so many other youth, there are so many other young Black youth who have the exact same experiences, and who are looking for a form of validation, or, you know, someone who's experienced it themselves. So that's really what encouraged me to share it. And already I've heard from so many who have told me that they can see themselves reflected in my book. And so that validation is so important sometimes when you can't find it anywhere else.
Thank you for sharing that. And actually we'll be giving away one of your books today as a prize. We have a question coming up, so somebody here will be able to hear your words as well. So with the play, it's an overwhelming issue to confront, which is why I was so grateful for Dominique Morisseau to write this play and to give sort of an entry point. What I found also very a generous offer or articulation was, sometimes it's harder when, as a parent, I also have 2 boys, it feels almost easier to control the child than to control the system. And sometimes that leads you to sort of being overpowering and not listening and all of that stuff. But by the end of this play, the mother has, well, a near life or death experience that gives her the strength to consider actually approaching the system, and asks sort of the whole audience in the convention of the play to do that with her. And you've all sort of found the strength to do that in a way. You are attacking it or inviting a larger conversation, a systemic conversation. So what are some of your hopes? I wanted to know, sort of, if you were to make that kind of appeal that Naya makes at the end, what are some of your hopes for the next steps, or what we can do as a society together?
Well, I think I have kind of gone full circle from being an activist to now focusing on what we can do to encourage Black identity and Black joy to be celebrated in our community, and raising that level of awareness. I think I really identified a lot with what the mother went through, because there is that sense of hopelessness. Because as to your experience that you talked about, they get it from all sides. My youngest brother, who's now in his 40s, almost 50, when he was in kindergarten, was told, I can't, by one of the girls, I can't sit next to you because I'm not allowed to. And to come now, it's 40-something years later, and I can tell you that there are young people in my life that are having those same experiences. So you're getting it from the friends, you're getting it from the elders in their community, you're getting it, it's like low expectations of the system. And I think it's very easy to sit and say, it's the system, it's this thing that happened, it's the history, and we can't individually do anything about it. And so my encouragement, my journey was about protesting and was about saying and sitting on equity committees and doing whatever you can and talk. But then I realized the power still lies with the so-called system to decide to do something about it or not. And so it's, you know, the serenity prayer about change the things you can and so on. So I thought, what can I actually have control over? And that is educating the young people in my community, educating the parents in the community, to be able to, because then I'm not protesting myself. We're standing together, because there are people who are teachers, black, white, from the Hispanic community, Chinese community, indigenous community, the Italian community, that are teaching our children, and who don't have low expectations of them. So I'm sort of gathering a critical mass of support that way. And then also trying to ensure that our children have critical analysis about what's happening around them. So my children and any children that I tutor or come into contact with, saying, when you see that play, when you see that movie, when you read that book, when you see that interaction, there was a show on TV that my kids used to watch, The Sweet Life of Jack and Cody or something like that. Yeah, Zach and Cody, yeah. And I had to stop them from watching Disney and also the Nickelodeon, all those, because one, the parents were always bumbling idiots, and our culture teaches you to respect your elders, okay, and go to them for advice. And then there were basically no black children unless they were really idiots, or South Asian unless they were idiots, or Asian unless they were very, very strange caricatures of people. So I just had to teach them to, I can't really control the media that they watch actually, because they seem to still know everything that was happening in the sweet life of Zach and Cody. And so I just taught them to ask those questions. I would say, so do you really think that that's realistic, and how come there's nobody else there? And why are the main characters always these people? And why are the black people always just like, do you know black people who just have that one dimension of themselves? Like, you know, don't they have whole families and whole contexts? Well, you know, I'm not using this language with the kids, but that's what I'm trying to get them to understand. And then, in just after raising that realization is the Black Joy part, and the teaching them to celebrate and to understand what their identity is. And so I think that's where the focus is. So I'm not any longer asking for something from the system, per se. I think I'm expecting it, but I'm not asking for it. And I'm teaching the people in our community as much as possible, starting with my own children, and starting by the example I lead with my own life, to say, oh, I want to be like that confident, take no S, black woman, right?
I mean, I think you summed it up pretty well. Knowledge is power, and I think that's really what it comes down to, not only with our young people, with our parents as well. And for myself, I've had a tough time navigating the school system, and that's somebody that knows a lot of the background information around policies and procedures. I know my rights, I know what services are available to my children, and it is still exhausting. It is absolutely exhausting. And so what does that look like for a parent that has no idea where to start, right? And so I agree, we really try to focus on sharing what we know with parents, and that comes through shared spaces where I'm able to talk about some of my experiences, in terms of not only advocating, but also knowing what's available, right? One of the things that came out of our research study was just having a consistent place for parents to network, right? So my child is struggling in this subject. Did you know that your child has access to their own personal laptop, which might help them get through their studies better? Something simple like that. A lot of parents just don't know what's out there, and you can't ask for what you don't know, right?
If I could, in terms of my hope, I think about, well, first I want to pick up off of what was already shared here, the dynamic between the individualized and the systemic. We always have to keep in mind that they're always interconnected, and so just having one intervention support the young person and drive all your resources to them won't be as effective as I think we'd hope if we are not changing policy and systems and practices. And so they have an interconnection. But one of the things that I'm always cognizant of is the way in which, frankly, Black parents often are put in this place to be seen as, and is reflected in the play, failures in some way because their child has not succeeded or has not lived up to a standard or has made a mistake, frankly. And I don't think we're always cognizant enough as a society about how unfair and how problematic that is when we don't fundamentally address the lack of curriculum, lack of inclusive curriculum of Black studies and histories and experiences and images, but also having representative teachers and principals. We are setting our kids up in many instances to fail and then blaming them and their parents for quote unquote being failures. But one of the things in coming up here, I wanted to make sure I spoke about is how, at least in one example, it shows how ridiculous this overemphasis on where the parents' conversation is, because our parents are working hard. So I've been very fortunate to be supported by my parents to ultimately become a lawyer, be able to contribute to these conversations on justice and anti-Black racism in many ways. I also have an older sister she's gone to Harvard to do a Master's of Education. She's just finishing an MBA at MIT. And we have a younger brother who has spent most of the last 10 years incarcerated. And we have the same parents, we grew up in the same house, parents were saying the same messaging, it just lands in different ways. What we needed at different times shifted. And I think, so when I get especially frustrated, if I'm honest, when I hear people say, well, where are their parents? If parents were more actively involved, if they just had great moms, our parents were pretty good. I'm like, not perfect, no one's parents are perfect. They try with what they have, but the point is it's so much more complex than that, and I don't think that's always appreciated. Often what you go into is, I think these social scripts that can create a pressure. For instance, we saw Naya carrying this pressure, like she had to save her son to get him through this system. And ultimately, for O as well, this notion that he's got to figure out his own way through all of this without being properly understood. And so again, it falls on him, and not a broader conversation on like this teacher that was provoking him. What is their exposure to anti-Black racism training and understanding the ways in which provoking, prodding, and targeting, doing lessons on Richard Wright, and these are heavy lessons. You really have to understand context. And so you have to be able to appreciate the way in which not every student will hear those questions in the same way. They will land differently, especially when they're among mostly non-Black peers. They will feel targeted. They will feel singled out if the questions are not coming forward in a way that is encouraging, that is more affirming. And I think you picked up on that. And so going back to what I was saying in terms of a broader hope is that we would have a greater, what I might call racial literacy, racial fluency, to have deeper conversations that allow Blackness to exist in its full spectrum. Because what we're often seeing when it comes to the suspension, expulsion, the streaming, all these challenges is we're bucking up against stereotypes. There are notions and ideas about Black people. If I were just to start riffing off a bit of words, folks would say, I know who you're talking about. If I just start saying lazy, uneducated, loud, late, violent, gang, gun, I don't have to say anything else. We'll start to understand who we're talking about. And so that speaks to how powerful that social script is that we've all internalized consciously and unconsciously, our teachers, principals, and administrators included.
Powerful. Thank you very much. for that reflection and for the personal story. It's really important to remember. I want to make sure that if there are any questions from our audience, that we can include any questions. We're going to wrap up pretty soon, but I did want to make sure that if there's a question. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I guess I thought of something that came up to me in the play. Like, we often think that teachers or police officers or things or that side of it, that there's often an intent of racism or an intent to really hurt this young person. But what if I was just wondering, what if the perspective, we had the teacher's perspective, and the teacher's perspective is he's trying to bring this sort of curriculum, diversity curriculum in the classroom. He realizes this young person is sort of marginalized and wants to engage this young person to share their perspective, meaning that, like, not thinking of this teacher as evil or anything like that, but really thinking about this teacher as really with the right intent but uninformed in a way. Like, how do we bridge that understanding, like, instead of just black and white, that there's often gray sides of that? Sometimes gray sides, I'm not saying often. How do we get to those real dialogues in schools and dialogues in the community about this issue and create that kind of understanding? So that's one thought that I had. And the other thought I had was in terms of many of the BIPOC families, there's often this sort of, we want our kids to be academically sort of to be successful academically. And so we think of sort of more professionalism in you know, be a lawyer or be a doctor, and many of our newcomer families have that kind of aspiration. But yet, sometimes the kids want to go to art school or take advantage of alternative schools, and that kind of conflict that happens. So I'm interested in those kind of conversations.
So on the first bit, I think that the burden of understanding has been carried heavily by members of our community in being understanding about what people really meant by their oppressive words towards us and so on. And so, you know, while I really thank you, Anthony, for that, for what you said about we do need system, because I'm not trying to say we don't need to address the system. However, I think the energy that it takes, where I am in my own life, and I guess where I've reached right now, is that I'm really about how do we live as normal a life as possible. I live on a farm right now. I don't see my neighbors if I don't have to. And there is a liberating feeling and a difference that I note about just being able to be in that space. And so while I think it is important for us to recognize that maybe some people don't mean it, I'm saying that right now, I'm taking the position that they have to do the work to figure out what's wrong with that. They have to have the racial language, literacy, right, to understand why that's a microaggression. I mean, there's so many little stories of beautiful people that have just said the wrong thing, you know, taken my voice in situations because they don't want the angry black woman to jump out, right? And et cetera, et cetera. And so then you say to yourself, I love you. I don't have any ill feeling towards you, but what you're doing is killing me. And it's too much, and I'm done. And so now, that's why I'm saying my focus is how do we strengthen the people in our own community to know what it's like. It's like we're in this container where the world has decided who we are, and all of the words that you've said, you know, it conjures up that image of that person, and the question, are you blood or crip? And how do we break free from that container and just be who we are. Like, there's so many issues that we have to contend with. We're named black, but we're not black. That's black in relation to something else. So everything in our lives that defines us tends to center whiteness, in a sense, right? And so anyway, so I'm kind of in that, I'm kind of reaching that stage where I am saying, how do we be ourselves? And how do we define ourselves outside of that? So I had a very strong reaction. So I just want to say one last thing. I had a strong reaction to one part of the play. And that was the father saying, I just don't know what to do, and walking away. And I'll tell you why, because I think that the story about black men in our community and about our community is one where they're a fail. And yeah, I struggled with that piece because I said, oh no, don't walk away. You had me right there, you know, in the play. I was like, no, don't walk away, come back, tell him I love you. I did the best that I could, and you know, something. Anyway.
But I think speaking to Adonis's point, that's where the gray is in the play. Like, I don't think she's trying to, there's no heroes in this play, right? It's just, she's not even offering an answer, she's offering a question. That we're raising, and all of you are interested enough to have it and to have a dialogue about it. And I think that's it. And I think, you know, Habiba actually, in her book, if you read it, one of her chapters is a letter to the Prime Minister and her suggestions. And so she has a suggestion to that question, which is training for all the teachers, and that some kind of standardized training, so that if you are teaching a subject and you actually are interested in picking that play, that novel, maybe because of that black child, and there was a great intention in it, once that child is saying, I really don't want to speak to it, I really don't want to speak to it, I really don't want to speak to it, to get into, to understand, oh, there might be something that I'm missing here, and this is a sensitive issue because the character is a black man who rapes a white woman. So it's complicated and nuanced, and I think that's what the training is asking people to do, is to think about the gaps where we don't have lived experiences, and to have sensitivity around that. And I think sensitivity training would have afforded that teacher a bit more resource in that moment, I would say. But again, gray. I think it is gray. I think that's what I love about the play. If the play told us who was right and who was wrong and everything else, I would not be interested. And I think our Soulpepper audience would not settle for that. We have one more question. Is there anybody? Yes.
I was thinking, because actually I connected a lot with your play, very good play. And because I'm a single parent, I've been raising my kid for over 20 years in one of the poorest neighborhoods in Toronto, and I can tell you that I can connect with you. And what I found over the years, because I passed through many things, bullying and all these stories that we heard about the system, and I had a lot of challenges. For me to overcome the challenges, went back to me as a parent, to spend all my life trying to make it work for him in the system. And I think there are many, many challenges in all the communities, because the first time when I read a book when he was 3 years old, says that everybody from a single parent is going to be on drugs and guns when he's going to be older. And I freaked out. And over the years, whatever you show in the play, and it's really true, when I went to different events about police and drugs and whatever like this, one of the reasons that I work continuous is the struggle inside of these kids. They are angry all the time, for whatever reason. And I think it's a very challenging for your community, compared with me, to overcome the kids in the school. And I'm not sure what is the future, because one question was about hoping, and I think there are so many challenges. I'm not so much involved in the education system, but it was lacking 20 years ago for a single parent in the poor neighborhood.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you. I think, you know what makes me think about, I mean, absolutely, I think the inequities, you know, looking at different class and so many pieces complicate people's navigation through the system 100%. I did want to kind of highlight something that Anthony is working on that that is, you know, the Peel Project, your project. Do you want to talk about that? And so that it includes people's actual backstories, so that it's included in the way that they, yeah.
Sure, so thank you for that. So one of the initiatives that I'm really fortunate to work on is called the Sentencing and Parole Project. Now, the Sentencing and Parole Project, what it aims to do is to provide judges and parole boards with more contextual information about offenders who identify as Black. So not just seeing the immediacy. So if we look at this play, it wouldn't just be, for instance, the push of the teacher and the teacher falling into the smart board, but understanding the layers like you would go into in the Sentencing and Parole Project, using this as an example, would interview mom, parents, caregivers to understand different exposure to issues of perhaps poverty or a lack of a sense of belonging, or identifying issues of systemic racism in housing, education, employment, however it's impacting those folks' lives. So when judges and parole board decision makers are making their decisions, they're not just seeing the event, the incident, but they're seeing what this person was dealing with, and they can make decisions that are more appropriate to the circumstances. So it's not just more or less time, but a question of more or less time and what social programming and supports or community health supports might be needed so that that person can get on the right track of life, so that they can be best supported to contribute more fully to society.
Yeah, I just thought we should share that as, again, an innovative idea that he's working on to think about how to really contextualize people's histories, and imagine if that was the way that people were actually sentenced, or it was considered, you know, that people's stories and lives were considered. So thank you for sharing that.
Going back to your question about what do we hope, what do we aspire to, I just want to say is that I aspire to living, you know, because what we as Blacks and as Black students or parents involved in the system, we're not living. And I really appreciated what Janelle said about living on the farm and just existing in that space, because when I think about it, and there's a part in the play where the mother, Nia, is explaining to Jasmine, and she said, it's a gamble. Every time he goes out, I don't know if he'll be safe, if he'll come back to me. And I found that to be so profound, because I said, this is not living, you know, she's not living. She's hoping for the best outcome, but preparing for the worst, you know, and so it tells me that as Black people, we're always living in this state of fear. We're always reacting. We're always responding. We're not really self-actualizing in the way we should, or fulfilling our true potential. And so I think my aspiration is for us just to live and to create our own spaces if we have to. So I really like this idea of alternative education, the Afrocentric education and so forth, because we've been in these spaces for so long, and the results have been the same, the outcomes have been the same, the repercussions have been the same. So I wonder when, or if, you know, I have to say if there will ever be change, because I'm honestly starting to doubt that there ever will be. So so I think I just like to put that out there, but otherwise, great discussion from the other panelists.
Thank you for being a part of it, and thank you. And I think I share my hope. I think just to say that I believe this is change. I believe that all these people invested in this conversation together gives me hope, and I want to really deeply thank this panel and Habiba for being with us today, and for all of you who joined us today. And it's a question. The question will be what is the actor's name? You need to reference your programs potentially. What's the actor's name who plays Naya in the play? Yeah, you can call it out. You want to say the name? There you go. Congratulations.